I'm James Brierton in Charlotte, North Carolina, and you are looking live at some of the very first pictures that we are getting as NASA is tracking the return of NASA's SpaceX Crew-9, which includes two of the quote unquote stranded astronauts that have been on the International Space Station now for more than 9 months after their Boeing Starliner spacecraft was deemed unsafe to return them home. They're going to be splashing down in the Gulf of America here in the next few moments off of the coast of Tallahassee, Florida. We'll show you right now weather conditions out there in Tallahassee. They could not have asked for better weather. Take a look at this from the nearby weather stem location. You can see right now weather conditions in that area: 66 degrees, partly cloudy skies, visibility up to 9 miles. And that's actually why NASA moved up the return of NASA SpaceX Crew-9 only a day and a half after NASA's SpaceX Crew-10 showed up at the space station in order to relieve them. Normally, that handover period is closer to 7 or 10 days. This right now, what you are looking at is the capsule, the Dragon capsule returning, and we will have that splashdown. And as I mentioned, in the next few moments or so, these are pictures that are coming to us from aircraft that NASA has in the general vicinity to help them track the spacecraft, which is currently coming in at a very high velocity. Matter of fact, if we quickly show you right now on Flight Tracker, kind of give you the lay of the land and where we are, right in here in the Big Bend of Florida. If we push on in, you can see we do have a NASA helicopter right off the coast here, and you can see really no other aircraft in the area because this is the area where we are expecting that splashdown in the next few minutes. And, you know, sometimes with these things, there is the opportunity to view it yourself with the naked eye as they're coming in. But because this is happening over daylight hours, it would be kind of hard to see. But this is right here, the general path that they will be taking as they come over Mexico, over the peninsula there, the Yucatan Peninsula, and then going to splash down again on the Gulf Coast of Florida. Here's a look right now at the astronauts inside the capsule. And let's take a listen into some of the communications.
You can see seat rotation happening inside the capsule. Great to get those first views of our crew members. Once again, the capsules are going about 350 miles per hour when the drogues are deployed. Those drogue parachutes that we manufacture here in-house are going to slow the spacecraft down to 119 miles per hour. And that is when we will see the main parachutes deploy, and that occurs about 6,000 feet above the ocean's surface.
And we will watch for those parachutes to be deployed here in the next few moments as we continue to look at these live pictures from NASA. You can see the spacecraft right there on your screen, a little bit clearer now as it is very quickly descending back down. Unlike the space shuttle, this is not going to make a landing on a runway. It's going to splash down, and here come those chutes right now. They'll begin slowing down as we near the Gulf of America. As you might recall, in June of 2024, NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams embarked on their first crewed test flight of Boeing's Starliner spacecraft, aiming for just a brief mission up at the International Space Station, some 10 days or so. But due to problems with Starliner's experienced propulsion systems, their thrusters malfunctioned and they experienced some helium leaks. NASA deemed that spacecraft unsafe for the crew to return home. So Wilmore and Williams went from spending 10 days to 9 months up at the International Space Station when NASA folded them in to this Crew-9 mission, which is now returning with them and two others on board. Normally, these crewed missions have 4 astronauts, sometimes from NASA, sometimes from other agencies. When Crew-9 launched, they only sent 2 up, and that meant it had 2 empty chairs so that Butch and Sonny could then return with what is the typical 4 crew rotation. Yes, I will go ahead and say that we did call this video the return of the stranded astronauts, but this capsule that they are returning in right now, this SpaceX capsule, has been parked with them at the space station for months. So had there been an emergency, they were not truly stranded so much as the headlines would lead you to believe. Yes, they were supposed to come home in 10 days as part of Boeing's Starliner mission. When that didn't happen, they got folded into the normal International Space Station crew rotation, which meant that they then served a full rotation and then some as a part of NASA's SpaceX Crew-9. Let's go ahead and look at these pictures. You can now see the water there just off in the distance as the spacecraft begins to really slow its velocity as it nears the Gulf waters. And they will also allow the spacecraft to splash down into the water, and then they will bring in other NASA vessels that will then lift it up onto the boat. The crew will stay in the Dragon capsule until the Dragon capsule has been lifted onto a boat, and Witchcraft officials and medical personnel will inspect them and help them onto the craft. We do anticipate, as we look at these first live ground pictures from NASA and SpaceX boats out there in the boats, we do anticipate that when these crew do come off the capsule and onto the boat, they will be on medical stretchers. It has absolutely nothing to do with the circumstances surrounding how long they've been in space. That is the standard protocol. So, to set your expectations, when you see medical personnel bring in stretchers, bring in wheelchairs to help the crew get off the capsule and onto the boat, that happens with each and every one of these SpaceX capsule returns, as has been the case since 2020. So, that is completely normal, standard operating procedure. You can see the 4 astronauts on board here as NASA returns us to this ground picture. Let's take a listen in.
This is a gorgeous bluebird day here that we have for the splashdown of Crew-9. It's incredible to think that the Dragon capsule just minutes ago was going over 17,000 miles per hour, and now gently coasting to a soft splashdown.
200.
Copy, 200 meters. Brace for splashdown.
As you can see there on your screen, continuing to monitor progress of the Dragon spacecraft. And we're going to stand by for splashdown, located in the Gulf of America, off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida.
And splashdown, Crew-9 back on Earth.
NASA SpaceX Crew-9 safely returning back into the Gulf of America waters off of Tallahassee, Florida. A beautiful day. You could not have asked for a more beautiful day in order to return from space. Again, this does include the 2 NASA astronauts who have been up there for more than 9 months. Let's take a listen in.
It is an amazing, what a ride. I see a capsule full of grins ear to ear.
And as you can see on your screen, we have visual confirmation of splashdown. Dragon Freedom has returned home, and NASA astronauts.
System safety verifications are in progress. We'll report back when recovery personnel are en route.
Understand. And, we're in section 2, 4.800 landing response. And looking for your words on this is necessary.
In the distance, we can see the recovery vessel making its way.
Copy, you're in section 2 for the environmental assessment in 4.800. That is not necessary today.
And again, off there in the distance, you can see the NASA vessels that will be making their way towards the SpaceX Dragon capsule. That charring you see in the spacecraft is completely normal. You can also see there's water coming out of it, as it might pick up during its initial splashdown here into the Gulf of America off the coast of Tallahassee. If you were to include the test mission, Demo 2, which flew 2 astronauts to space in the year 2020, this return of NASA SpaceX Crew-9 marks the 10th mission that SpaceX and NASA have collaborated on for human flight to space. This whole collaborative came about, of course, after the end of the NASA Space Shuttle program in 2011. How we got to where we are today is also important to note that this is the first time that astronauts returning in this SpaceX capsule didn't all fly up on a SpaceX capsule. 2 of them flew up on Boeing's Starliner. When the folks at NASA decided to do away with the space shuttle program and begin towards this model where private companies, SpaceX and Boeing among them, would be flying astronauts to space. The idea was to have more than one program, more than just SpaceX, flying astronauts in order to have a little competition and a little redundancy. Well, Boeing has run into delays after delays with their Starliner. In June, Butch and Sonny did take the Boeing Starliner up to the International Space Station for what was Boeing's first test flight, coming 4 years after SpaceX's first test flight. But again, because of issues with the Boeing Starliner craft, it was decided that after that June launch, that Butch and Sonny would join NASA's SpaceX Crew-9 when they made it up to the space station at the end of September. So that's how these two astronauts who have now returned as part of NASA SpaceX Crew-9 ended up spending over 9 months in space. A little bit longer than is the typical crew rotation, which is approximately every 6 months, depending on what the weather is for both return and launch of the next subsequent crew. And you can see now some of those first vessels are making their way over to the vessel. These are kind of the first crew that will go out. They'll make some observations, both visually and with equipment, take some sensors, and kind of check the integrity of the vessel before a larger vessel, which is probably the one out there in the distance, makes it on over, and then they'll kind of pick it up. They will pick up the SpaceX Dragon and they will put it onto a boat before anyone exits the vehicle. So don't expect to see anybody just yet. But what they're detecting right now is vapors, hypergolic vapors, anything that might be emitting off the spacecraft. And so that's what this very first crew is looking for as we are continuing to look at these live pictures provided by NASA and SpaceX of what I can only imagine is a drone vehicle at this particular altitude out here. But again, look how calm the waters are, how blue the sky is, visibility 9 miles, according to our nearby weather stem location there in Tallahassee. And that's the reason the crew left the International Space Station last night, East Coast time, a little before midnight, and began this journey home, which does take a little over 12 hours because the weather was so good off the coast of Florida. They wanted to get this crew home as soon as possible. Yes, this mission has become very polarized, very political in the age of politics here in the United States. But again, the astronauts aboard this SpaceX flown mission, of course, a company owned by Elon Musk, being decided some months ago that this was the way they would be returning home at the completion of the Crew-9 rotation. As we continue to wait for the vehicle, the boat to come on over and lift up the Dragon capsule, let's talk a little bit about the importance of the International Space Station and why it's still being flown, because in the next few years, we do anticipate that the International Space Station program will too transition from government sponsor to private companies who will host these space station or stations around the Earth, maybe around the moon. Currently, the International Space Station houses crews that rotate both from NASA launches and from Russia launches. They do include astronauts, personnel from other countries such as Japan. We see them from countries inside of Europe. And the science that they conduct on the International Space Station is intended to help get humans onto the moon and then eventually onto Mars. Each one of these being a stepping stone towards longer and further away human space flight in space. The Carolina Weather Group had a chance to go to Kennedy Space Center in 2023 for the NASA SpaceX Crew-6 launch. And during that behind-the-scenes tour, we learned about some of the science that is done up there at the International Space Station, as we recently revisited on our weekly Wednesday night podcast. Some of what they're doing on the International Space Station is learning how to grow food.
Freedom, hypergol sweeps, and unfired ordnance checks are nominal. Rigging is in progress. Approximately 25 minutes until capsule lift. Stand by for PMC with SpaceX flight surgeon.
In order to sustain long human missions to the moon or eventually onto Mars, we need to know as a species how to grow food in space. And growing food with different types of water, different types of gravity, different types of pH. These are all things that we need to learn and optimize so that we can yield the most crop as possible, because it's not practical to stuff the vessel full of protein bars when we take a multi-months long mission to Mars and back again. And so being able to grow some of our own food will not only make those missions more successful, but also will help astronauts have a variety of foods so they don't get bogged down by eating the same thing over and over again. You can see now just to the top right corner of the screen, that is the vessel that is probably going to do a little bit of a 3-point turn back up here and will lift up the SpaceX Dragon capsule onto the boat. A little communication happening now between the medical staff and the crew on board. Completely normal, completely on protocol. You can actually see, as we typically can, a crew member here, part of the recovery team, climbing up on the space capsule, and I think they're going to look through a window maybe. So this will be the first time that the crew on board have seen other human beings face to face, other than those up on the International Space Station, in some months. Let's take a listen in and see if we can learn a little bit more.
On top of the Dragon spacecraft, they are going to be working to install plugs in the Draco thrusters to ensure that none of those, and to ensure that no more hypergolic fumes or vapors come out from the spacecraft. They'll also place harnessing around the spacecraft that are required in order to lift it out of the water. Go ahead, Sandra.
Continuing to get some views of the recovery personnel, both the main recovery vessel, Megan, as well as some of those fast boats that we discussed previously. It looks like just a beautiful day there out off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida. Weather was pristine. We were able to get undocked from the International Space Station as expected at 10:05 p.m. Pacific time yesterday evening, and Crew Dragon has since completed steps ahead of its splashdown at 2:57 p.m. Pacific, and we're now stepping through procedures to get Dragon hoisted up onto the Megan recovery vessel and get the crew extracted out of the spacecraft. And you did see some of the parachutes that were near the spacecraft. Upon detection of landing, Dragon automatically releases those main parachutes to prevent wind from pulling the spacecraft. Dragon then automatically safes any pyrotechnics that may still be present on the vehicle and may automatically perform additional minor system reconfigurations. The astronauts will remain seated and in their suits at this point, but the onboard air conditioning keeps things temperature controlled inside the spacecraft so the crew remains comfortable, and the communication systems.
Freedom, SpaceX, ComCheck.
SpaceX, this is Freedom. We loud and clear.
Copy that, Freedom. Have you loud and clear as well, and Dragon to ground is no longer private.
Understand, thank you.
As we saw there on the screen, we have a couple of fast boats in the recovery fleet that have quickly moved into the splashdown location. They are being followed by one of the main recovery vessels, which will move into position upwind of the spacecraft. The two fast boats have very specific roles. Excuse me. The first approach is focused on immediate safety inspection, as we saw. They do this for spacecraft integrity and checking for any presence of those hypergolic propellant vapors. And this ensures that it is safe for the recovery vessel to approach Dragon. Once Dragon is cleared for full approach, as we heard is the case today, the team begins rigging the spacecraft for water recovery by the recovery ship. The second fast boat is responsible for parachute recovery and also serves as a redundant boat to the first one that makes the initial approach to the Dragon spacecraft. As we saw a little bit earlier, we were also able to see one of the recovery team members get on a jet ski to help gather up the parachutes that were automatically detached from the Dragon spacecraft upon splashdown.
And it will take a little over 10 minutes for the recovery crew to complete their safety checks. Once they complete, the team will begin preparing Dragon to be lifted. And as you see, they are preparing for that to take place at this point. As part of the preparation for this lift, one member of the recovery team has climbed on top of the spacecraft already so they can attach Dragon's hoist rings and connect to the lifting lines. It will take us less than an hour to raise Dragon to the recovery boat and remove the crew from the spacecraft. After medical checkouts, the crew will return to land within 4 hours by helicopter. And if no additional medical assistance is needed, the crew will board a waiting NASA plane and depart for Houston.
All right, so mention there of the NASA helicopter, and you can actually see that if I switch on over to our flight tracker. We had one NASA helicopter. This one might be returning to shore. This might be part of the television outfit. That was something we also learned about when we went to Kennedy Space Center, all the different aircraft that they use. This aircraft here, which is coming up as not available, is also most likely involved in this operation. Is the WB-57, and because this is a closed airspace, it gives me pretty good confidence that this is in fact one of the military aircrafts that NASA uses for this recovery operation. But you can see this area off the Big Bend of Florida completely void of any other aircraft. I would imagine if we were to pull up boats, it would also be completely empty of boats because of the return of the NASA SpaceX 9 crew just a few moments ago. I also wanted to show you this picture. Was taken up on the international. Oh, hang on. Let's listen into this.
Sandra, how do you hear me?
I've got you loud and clear, Jaden. It's so great to hear you.
Awesome. So Splashdown, Sandra, was nothing
Freedom,
short of
be advised.
spectacular.
We are transitioning the forward link. Comm will be unavailable for approximately 5 minutes.
We're going to hear from a NASA reporter who is out there on one of the vessels.
Thanks so much, Jaden. We did just have some communications letting us know that we'll have about a 5-minute period where we won't be able to hear from the crew. So please go ahead, tell us, how was the view from the recovery vessel?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was mentioning earlier, Splashdown was nothing short of spectacular. And we were stationed about 1.5 nautical miles away from the splashdown zone and had great visuals here on the recovery vessel Megan. We actually saw a little of the smoke trail as the spacecraft was coming in, and then moments later we spotted those drogue chutes, and this was quickly followed by 4 healthy white and orange main parachutes. We then tracked Dragon all the way down as it slowly propelled into the ocean. And I think I speak for all of us on the ship when I say a new core memory was made today, and we are looking forward to having Crew-9 on board with us a little later.
Jaden, that is amazing. Now, obviously, we are watching it here on camera, and the landing conditions look pretty good, but how was it from your perspective? What is the sea state out there?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we've had optimal conditions for Splashdown, and today it is sunny and 63 degrees outside right now with clear skies, light winds, and calm seas. The sea looks absolutely beautiful right now, and light blue with the sun reflecting from it. And Kay, I think the crew's going to like what they feel weather-wise on this picture-perfect day for Splashdown off the coast of Tallahassee.
Thanks so much, Jaden. It certainly looks like a beautiful day. Can you tell us a little bit about the journey of the recovery forces to get to this point?
Sure. So one unique aspect of this recovery was the onboard training on station conducted for Butch and Sunny to ensure they were ready to return on a Dragon spacecraft. That training covered all aspects of their return, including nominal and contingency departures, the orbit burn, splashdown, and post-landing ops, which is what this team is preparing for now. As for the recovery teams themselves, we started the day taking a series of helicopters out to the vessel. And as standard, the recovery director and crew support teams were on that first helicopter out and took the time to get everything prepared on the ship. About 2 hours before splashdown, they deployed those fast boats and jet skis into the water. I was actually on the second helicopter out, and we were on the vessel about an hour and a half before splashdown and landed on top of the helicopter pad on the Megan. And the teams have been working diligently across their respective disciplines this week, executing what can only be described, in my point of view, as a logistical masterpiece, just ensuring every detail has been in place for Crew-9's return.
That is such great news. I'm so glad that you're able there to experience it in person. Now, can you tell us a little bit about what's next to retrieve the crew for the recovery personnel on board?
Yeah, Kate. So coming up next, Dragon will be hoisted into the on-deck translation system, or the nest, at the aft end of the ship. and then will be translated pretty quickly towards that egress platform. We'll perform another series of safety checks as final precautionary measures just to make sure there are no hypergolic vapors present before opening that side hatch. And then once that side hatch of the spacecraft is open, the crew will be assisted out of the capsule one by one from NASA and SpaceX.
Freedom, SpaceX, ComCheck.
Freedom's got you loud and clear.
Thanks, Nick. I've got you loud and clear as well. We have completed our forward link transition.
And Jaden, if you did just want to go ahead and let us know what is next to retrieve the crew, we are continuing to get some great views on our screen, but I know you have an even better view yourself.
Oh, yeah, Sandra, this view is absolutely unbeatable. So just to kind of finish off what I was saying is once that side hatch of the spacecraft is open, that crew will be assisted out of the capsule one by one from NASA and SpaceX medical personnel, where they will then head to the med bay. And after those medical checks, they will get on that first helicopter out and arrive at the airport, where they will then board a NASA plane and then head back to Houston, Texas at the Johnson Space Center to begin their post-flight period. And we're eager to see the Crew-9 astronauts back on Earth, and we'll keep you updated on every moment of this process. And with that, I'll toss it back over to you guys at Hawthorne.
Thank you so much. That was Jaden Jennings, NASA Public Affairs Officer, who watched Freedom splash down firsthand from the recovery vessel Megan. Thanks so much, Jaden.
And this is the voice of the Carolina Weather Group's James Brierton with you from Charlotte, North Carolina, as we continue to monitor the return of NASA's SpaceX Crew-9. Right before we went out to that live report from NASA and SpaceX, I was getting ready to show you this picture that was taken during the brief handover between NASA SpaceX Crew-9 and NASA SpaceX Crew-10. You can see the crowded International Space Station up there as the two crews took this photo together. NASA SpaceX Crew-10 beginning their approximately 6-month rotation up on the International Space Station. So as we've heard, this is going to take a little bit of time here in order to get the crew situated and get the vessel onto a boat. And then what we expect to see is once the vessel from SpaceX, the Dragon capsule, is on that boat, medical personnel will aid the astronauts as they come out of the capsule. This is completely normal. Don't be alarmed if you see wheelchairs or stretchers. This happens with each and every one of these returns. It has absolutely nothing to do with the whole backstory between Butch and Sunny. These astronauts who have become dubbed in the headlines as the stranded astronauts returning in the SpaceX capsule that has been docked with them for months on the International Space Station, really making you wonder how stranded you really are if your exit vehicle has been there with you the whole time and you are simply fulfilling the mission that you were reassigned into. But nonetheless, after more than 9 months, they're back here on Earth, and pretty soon we'll be reignited with friends and family who, of course, have been very anxious to see them once again after their 10-day mission turned into one of lasting 9 months. I'm James Brierton in Charlotte, North Carolina. You've been watching live coverage here on the Carolina Weather Group. In just a moment, I'll take you back over to NASA and SpaceX coverage, and we'll continue to monitor that with you as the crew will eventually make their way out of the capsule. I'm going to step aside. I'll see you back here Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time for another edition of the Carolina Weather Group, our weekly show covering weather, science, technology, and more from the Carolinas and beyond. Until then, be well. Talk to you again real soon.
That is, they're working on top of the Dragon capsule. Earlier, we saw that person performing safety checks. Now we can see some harnessing being placed around the capsule. This harnessing is what will be used to lift the Dragon capsule out of the water and onto the recovery vessel. Wow, we got a cute little pod of dolphins. It wasn't just one or two.
I mean, that water just looks beautiful. We had ideal splashdown parameters today. Obviously, wave height, ne'er a concern. The weather is beautiful, as Jaden mentioned, in the 60s, sunny. Looking forward to seeing Crew-9 exit the capsule here shortly once they get hoisted onto the recovery vessel Megan.
We can see that recovery vessel slowly but surely closing the distance there between, dolphin cam back again. We can see that the Dragon capsule and the recovery vessel, that distance is closing. Again, this is just one more step as we continue to work recovery operations for Dragon Freedom, and we anticipate the lift of the Dragon capsule to occur here in just a few minutes. Now, once all of the rigging is on the capsule and it's hooked up to the recovery vessel, we will see the hydraulic arm, which is that kind of like bridge-like structure there at the aft end of the recovery vessel. We'll see that articulate backwards, and that's a good sign that we're getting even closer to pulling the capsule out of the water. It will then move forward, and the capsule will be placed inside of what you can see there is basically a basket. We call it the nest, Dragon nest, where that's where the capsule will be placed in order for it to be translated to the forward end of the vessel and for the astronauts to egress.
And before that does take place, we'll have potentially views of the rigger go ahead and jump off of the spacecraft there.
That typically occurs when the spacecraft is a little bit closer to the recovery vessel, and we usually get a really good view of that particular operation from one of the onboard cameras from the recovery vessel. That is an operation that I have a lot of respect and admiration for, that individual that does that.
So again, Dragon continuing to get closer and closer to the recovery vessel, Megan. You see some of those ropes now coming into view as well. If you are just joining us, Crew-9 Splashdown off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time with NASA astronauts Nick Hague, Butch Wilmore, Sonny Williams, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov. They're now working through procedures to hoist this spacecraft up onto the recovery vessel Megan.
We just saw that hydraulic arm get lowered into the lifting position. That arm will be the mechanism that is utilized to lift Dragon up and out of the water and into the nest located there at the aft end of the recovery vessel.
And the recovery vessel being used today is, as we mentioned multiple times, is named Megan, but that's actually after NASA astronaut Megan McArthur, who flew on Crew-2 a couple of years ago. We're getting some views now from actually inside the boat.
Yeah, you're exactly right. This view is straight down the recovery vessel. That platform that was closest to the camera, that is the egress platform.
Freedom, rigging is almost complete. Approximately 5 minutes until capsule lift.
Great news there from SpaceX Core. So about 5 minutes left until we see Dragon Freedom get lifted out of the water. That hydraulic arm, as I said before, is the mechanism that will lift it. It's quite swift, actually, the whole process of getting the spacecraft.
Brace for capsule lift.
Bracing.
There it goes, Dragon Freedom being lifted out of the water and onto our recovery vessel, Megan.
So once securely on...
Welcome aboard the recovery vessel. Recovery personnel are completing final checks and stand by for translation to the egress platform.
Freedom copies.
Great news there, letting us know that Dragon Freedom has been successfully recovered from the water's surface. If you've just joined us, we had an on-time splashdown at 5:57 p.m. Eastern Time, and we can now see that the water recovery operations are continuing to progress. The nest where the Dragon spacecraft is located is going to get moved forward. This will happen after one of the recovery crew members does some checks, and we'll also see some hosing. Obviously, the spacecraft splashed down in salt water. Salt water is corrosive, and we want to try and rinse out as much of the salt water as possible to reduce that corrosion on the metallic structures. So we can see some guidance there being provided, really steering the spacecraft properly into the Dragon's nest.
And it's been 30 minutes since Dragon splashed down, and as you can see there, the spacecraft is already on board the recovery vessel Megan. Things continuing to move very smoothly today throughout the entire operations from the deorbit burn up until this point as well.
And Freedom, it looks like the positioning wasn't quite right, so they are working on repositioning the capsule in the nest now.
Okay, copy that. Thanks.
And with that, the team is just going to adjust the Dragon spacecraft a bit so that it's in the right position ahead of translating up a little bit closer ahead of the side hatch. So the team is now going to step through the procedures to ensure that that takes place.
While Dragon does fly itself autonomously, it clearly is unable to park itself autonomously. We want to make sure that the Dragon capsule is properly seated there in that nest. Once Dragon is fully seated in the nest, we'll probably see a bunch of that salt water come out from the bucket there located underneath the side hatch. See some salt water splash out. As I mentioned before, one of the recovery team members will begin hosing down the exterior of the spacecraft.
So you are continuing to get some great live views on your screen of Crew-9, which includes NASA astronauts Nick Hague, Sunny Williams, Butch Wilmore, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov, who splashed down off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida, 2:57 p.m. Pacific time this afternoon. Now working to get that spacecraft situated in the nest. Just making some final adjustments and tweaks to ensure that it's nice and secure.
Once the spacecraft is seated and secured and oriented correctly in the nest, Dragon will be moved into the hangar located underneath that helipad that we saw earlier from the aerial views during recovery.
All right, Freedom, looks like you are settled into the nest now. Team is working through hypergol sweeps.
Copy all.
Call out there telling us that the recovery team is doing the second round of those hypergolic sweeps. This helps ensure that everyone, all the recovery team members that are located basically right where this camera is located on, towards the forward end of the recovery vessel, that they will all be safe once the spacecraft is translated forward. So we're just doing some additional steps to make sure that the hypergolic propellant that is utilized for maneuvering the Dragon capsule while on orbit, making sure that none of those vapors are still present on the exterior of the capsule.
That's right. And there are a variety of individuals on board the boat that help with recovery operations. Not only do we have the recovery personnel that you see here, but we also have a doctor that will check out the crew members as standard procedure. As with any spacecraft that is returning from space, we always perform a medical check with the crew. So you will see the crew come out of the capsule and be placed on stretchers, just like with the Soyuz landing and with all of our Dragon splashdowns, that is the nominal procedure. We'll stand by to see Dragon Freedom translate or scooch up a little bit closer to the camera angle that we're seeing right here. And then teams will step through procedures to get that side hatch opened. You see it right in the dead center of your screen there. It's kind of that rectangular shape. It has not been opened since Crew-9, which include Nick Hague and Alexander Gorbanov, launched back in September from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. So that will be the very first time that that hatch is opened. Once docked to the International Space Station, crew enter through the top hatch, which was where the nose cone is now closed. That's the hatch that they actually utilize to go ahead and get inside the International Space Station. So as we get a little closer to that hatch opening procedure, you might start to see more individuals come into frame for some of that support. The ship has a maximum capacity of a little over 40 people on board, and it takes a variety of different roles, as we've discussed, to support. Also on board is the chief of the astronaut office for NASA, that's Joe Acaba.
Now, while we are standing by for translation of the Dragon spacecraft to the platform there, the recovery platform that we see in the foreground, it is important to note that Nick, Sonny, Butch, and Alexander will be getting assistance from the recovery teams while exiting the spacecraft. This is the same process for any returning long-duration crew members. As you could imagine, returning to a gravity environment can wreak havoc on our vestibular system, which is responsible for maintaining balance and motion. Of course, safety is our #1 priority with this operation, so we'll see the crew members helped out of the spacecraft one by one, and they will be assisted the few feet to the medical quarters aboard the boat.
And on board Dragon are 3 veteran space flyers. That includes Nick Hague, the commander, as well as Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams. Alexander Gorbanov is completing his very first space flight on this mission, and he completed 171 days in space along with Nick Hague.
For those of you that have just recently joined us, well, I would encourage you to hit that rewind button and go back a few minutes. It was a beautiful splashdown of Dragon Freedom with the Crew-9 cohort on board. They had an on-time splashdown at 5:57 p.m. Eastern Time, 2:57 p.m. Pacific Time. We can see that the spacecraft...
Freedom translation is in progress.
Copy, and seal it.
We can see that spacecraft was successfully recovered from the ocean surface and is now being washed with fresh water, as obviously they splashed down in salt water. So we're trying to rinse off as much of that salt water as possible. And we can see the spacecraft continuing to move closer and closer to that recovery deck.
Freedom, the crew is working on side hatch opening now. Expect hatch open in about 2 minutes.
Okay, copy that. And Kira, just wanted to say that you guys, you and the team did an awesome job, both uphill and downhill.
just really, really impressed. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. It's been an honor.
This is a pretty exciting moment coming up. We are working to open the side hatch. One thing that may not be obvious from, just looking at the spacecraft here is that this side hatch that we're about to open, the last time it was open was when this spacecraft was at the launch pad. This side hatch is what is used for initial capsule ingress and final capsule egress, but all comings and goings from the spacecraft while it is on board the space station are from the forward hatch, which is located at the top of the spacecraft under that nose cone. So this is a pretty exciting moment because it will be the crew's first breath of fresh air since boarding their ships at the start of their journeys last year.
And the very first person that will have the opportunity to say hello to the crew once that hatch is open is a SpaceX medical recovery personnel representative. Then we'll see procedures take place to remove the footrests of Dragon. That will just help the recovery personnel get a little bit more room to access the crew and help get them out of the spacecraft.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Safety is, once again, top priority here, and removing those footrests from all 4 seats will be helpful as a SpaceX recovery team member will actually go into the capsule into Dragon Freedom to help the crew members unbuckle and stand up, and essentially we'll also see a fun little slide be put in place to help the crew members exit the spacecraft safely. So yeah, we're going to remove all 4 of those footrests to basically give a little bit more working room inside the spacecraft.
That's right. And we did hear the go for that hatch opening, so we're just a couple minutes away from being able to see that. And then we might be able to get the chance to see a couple of views inside of the Dragon and see the crew following their splashdown.
Now, opening that side hatch isn't quite like opening the door to your car. We have to depress the seal around the side hatch, as well as, we'll now see them open that side hatch up.
And there you have it. The side hatch is open for the first time since September.
We can see some of the protective equipment there that was brought into frame that will help protect the edge of the side hatch, one, from any potential damage. Oh, we can see the recovery crew member there taking photos of the side hatch seal. This is part of the standard operation for recovery. These photos will get saved into our procedure. We'll then install that protective frame around the side hatch. This helps to ensure that the side hatch itself, the edges of it, incur no damage while crew members are coming out from the spacecraft. If you missed it, there was also a recovery team member that went inside. So there are now 5 people on board the Dragon spacecraft.
And if you are just joining us, it has not yet even been an hour since Crew-9 Splashdown. off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time. The crew is now on board the recovery vessel Megan, and the hatch is open. The next major milestone that we'll see is when the crew will actually egress or exit the spacecraft. But before that, they'll continue to, the recovery personnel rather, will continue to install that protective area around the hatch and then remove the footrests. So we're a couple minutes away from seeing the crew egress, but not too long away.
We'll probably see those footrests being handed out here in the near future, as I mentioned before. Oh, of course, we got to get a well-documented photo of the moment. Although we can't see it from here, I'm pretty sure there are 4 smiles on board right now.
And we did hear that report out from the commander, Nick Hague, following Splashdown, that there were four smiles as far as he could see.
Yeah, capsule full of grins. Now, generally speaking,
and there we do see Crew-9, some happy waves, smiles all around back on Earth.
generally speaking, we have the individuals in the 2 center seats of the spacecraft exit first. You might hear us refer to this as the exit process as egress. It's just another term for exiting the spacecraft. Generally speaking, we most of the time have the 2 center seats egress first, as it makes moving around inside the capsule a little bit easier. We can see the tablets that were previously located on the upper leg of the crew members. We can see those being handed out to the recovery team. Those were taken off prior to the entry phase, to spacecraft reentry. Those had to be stored and secured prior to dynamic operations.
It looks like we are starting to see the footrests also be removed. I just saw one there on the screen. There are 4, of course, 1 for each crew member.
Those footrests are made out of carbon fiber and are actually sized appropriately for each crew member, as everybody has different measurements and different leg lengths. Same goes for the armrests and the bucket length of each seat. We size those appropriately for the crew members and to ensure their comfort and safety. I believe we just saw the little ramp that is used to help slide the crew members out from inside the spacecraft.
And once the crew does exit Dragon Freedom, they will be placed on to a stretcher to go to a medical bay for medical checkouts. This is standard procedure for all Dragon spacecraft flights that Splashdown crewed, as well as for our Soyuz spacecraft that land in Kazakhstan.
We could see the exterior of Dragon Freedom quite clearly in this shot, and it's such a beautiful sight. I personally prefer the capsule when it has some of that charring from atmospheric reentry. It is the signature sign of a capsule that has returned to Earth.
Continuing to stand by for our first crew member to egress or exit Crew Dragon Freedom following their splashdown at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time. Dragon undocked from the International Space Station at 10:05 p.m. Pacific just yesterday, so it was about 17 hours of phasing. And while on board the International Space Station, Crew-9 contributed to 900 hours of science, over 150 research experiments and investigations, making great use of the microgravity lab of the International Space Station, which celebrates 25 years of continuous human presence this November.
Looks like we're about to get our first crew member here upon egress of the Dragon spacecraft.
So we are standing by for that egress. Outside of Dragon, you do see one of those stretchers. This is the expected procedure as the crew will be taken to medical facilities following their exit from Dragon.
We can see folks on board clapping as our first crew member.
And that is NASA astronaut Nick Hague, commander of Crew-9, now out of Crew Dragon Freedom. Some smiles, thumbs up, and a wave. Can't get any better than that.
Yeah, that is one happy camper, that's for sure. As we said before, it is standard procedure for all of our long-duration crew members to receive assistance upon egressing from the spacecraft. We basically help them move off of the recovery deck and into the private medical quarters for their initial consultation with the SpaceX flight surgeon. So we'll see that take place for all 4 of our crew members today.
And we are standing by for the next crew member to exit Freedom. Next up out of the capsule, we expect Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov. His first space flight. Spent 171 days in space alongside NASA astronaut Nick Hague.
Looks like we're getting some cheers and clapping on board as Alexander is slid down the little ramp and placed into the mobility aid. Once again, big smile.
Now, the 2 crew members remaining in Dragon are NASA astronauts Sunny Williams and Butch Wilmore. They completed 286 days in space.
One of the remaining footrests being removed from the Dragon spacecraft. As I said before, we generally try to have the crew members that are located in the two center seats aboard Dragon, and we like to have them egress first if possible, as it creates a little bit more movable working room inside the spacecraft. There is a recovery crew member inside that is helping all of our Crew-9 crew egress or exit from the spacecraft.
We are standing by for the next crew member to egress or exit Crew Dragon Freedom following the splashdown not even an hour ago at 2:57 p.m. Pacific time. Really have the recovery operations down pretty quick at this point.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible to think that, just 5 years ago when we were doing the initial demonstration missions of the Dragon for Crew Dragon, that now we're under about 30 minutes for, to retrieve the spacecraft from the water, and just several minutes here while it's been on board, and to get everyone, really to get that side hatch open. For those of you that have just recently joined, the Dragon had an on-time splashdown. Looks like we're getting our next crew member here. That is none other than Sunny Williams. Big smile, big waves. She, like her other crew members, now will be assisted onto the mobility aid.
There we have it, some waves, some thumbs up, and some smiles.
Definitely seems to be a theme among all recovery operations.
Absolutely. And of course, that leaves NASA astronaut Butch Wilmore inside Dragon in seat 4. We're getting some views of him now as he egresses or exits the spacecraft.
Once again, some elation and cheers there from Butch Wilmore. As we mentioned before, returning to Earth coming from a microgravity environment can wreak havoc on the body. So it is customary and just standard procedure for all of our long-term space residents to get assistance once they are back on board the recovery vessel.
Well, now that Nick, Butch, Sunny, and Alexander are safely back home on Earth and getting checked out by the NASA medical team, we're going to wrap up our live coverage of their return. The Crew-9 mission began a little differently than usual since Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams were already aboard the space station when Nick Hague and Alexander Gorbunoff arrived on the Crew-9 spacecraft in September. Having arrived as the crew flight test crew for Starliner, Wilmore and Williams were fully incorporated into the space station's Expedition 72 team and began research and other work aboard the station along with the other crew members. Williams commanded the orbiting laboratory for much of the expedition. After a successful liftoff and separation from Falcon 9, Nick and Alexander made a short flight on board Dragon to the International Space Station. Veterans of long-duration space station missions, both Williams and Wilmore conducted spacewalks during their 9 months in space. Like all crews on the station, Crew-9 had the ability to leave at any point had there been an emergency. With their full-duration mission coming to an end, the crew began packing up their personal items for their return to Earth about a week ago and worked through tasks and shared lessons learned with Crew-10 teams as they arrived a few days ago.
Their journey home began about 17 hours ago when they closed the forward hatch to Dragon and undocked from the space station at 10:05 p.m. Pacific, 1:05 a.m. Eastern. After 4 successful departure burns and a phasing burn to line up their orbit, Nick, Butch, Sonny, and Alexander rested for a few hours before waking up to prepare for re-entry this morning. We jettisoned Dragon's trunk and performed our final on-orbit maneuver, the approximately 7.5-minute-long deorbit burn, and that occurred at 2:11 p.m. Pacific, 5:11 p.m. Eastern Time, and that sent Dragon on its path home. The spacecraft re-entered the Earth's atmosphere and slowed its descent with successful deployments of 2 drogue parachutes and 4 main parachutes, with the final splashdown occurring off the coast of Tallahassee, Florida at 2:57 p.m. Pacific, 5:57 p.m. Eastern. Following that successful splashdown, we saw SpaceX recovery experts move in and prepare Dragon Freedom for its lift onto the recovery vessel. And just a little less than an hour following splashdown, we saw Nick, Sonny, Butch, and Alexander make their way out of Dragon and into the recovery ship's medical facilities, safe and sound.
Next up, they'll catch a helicopter flight back to shore, where they'll transfer to aircraft that will take them home. The astronauts will take a NASA plane for the short flight back to Houston, where they'll be reunited with family and friends to bring an end to this mission. It's been an honor and a privilege to share their journey with all of you as we continue this new era in human spaceflight.
Return today marks the end of the direct handover we executed after successfully launching the Crew-10 mission to the space station just last week on Friday, March 14th. Thank you, as always, for joining us for tonight's coverage of the splashdown of Crew-9. Remember to follow SpaceX on X and NASA online and on social media for updates for the very latest on crew and cargo flights to and from the International Space Station.
And we'll continue to share the progress of Nick, Sonny, Butch, and Alexander on social media as they travel back home. We do also have a post-splashdown media briefing coming up at approximately 4:30 p.m. Pacific, 7:30 p.m. Eastern, where leadership will share a final update as we conclude this successful mission. So, from all of us at NASA and SpaceX, welcome home, Crew-9. So long.